What's up, Coordination? On the pod today, we have Connor McCormick, and we are talking about whether or not hyperstructures can be free forever, but also simultaneously valuable to own. So a hyperstructure is a new type of infrastructure that exists in Ethereum or in the blockchain. Think about a physical structure as something that exists in a city or on land. A hyperstructure is something that exists in Ethereum. So you can think about something like Rocket Pool or something like Uniswap as a hyperstructure, in that they're a unstoppable, free, permissionless, positive sum, credibly neutral structure that exists in Ethereum that allows humans to coordinate on top of them. So Uniswap basically is a market that allows people to trade tokens with liquidity providers and AMMs, and that is the hyperstructure that is Uniswap. Rocket Pool allows you to stake RPL and to run an Ethereum validator with less than 32 ETH. These are hyperstructures. These are infrastructure in Ethereum as opposed to infrastructure in meaty space that where they were used to, like a structure in a city. One of the ideas that Connor and I have been debating on Twitter, we've been debating this for like 6 or 9 months on Twitter, is can a hyperstructure be both free forever and incredibly valuable to own? So can we use private capital in order to bootstrap these infrastructures and make them into public infrastructure that will not be rent seeking? Is kind of what's at stake here. And if you're a regen who cares about funding public goods, this is obviously extremely germane to you, because if you build something, if you can channel innovation into building public infrastructure, 21st century infrastructure, hyperstructures, and you can channel capital into it, and you can make a salary working on public infrastructure, then that's huge for creating an ecosystem of public goods in Web3. And Connor has kind of been on the side of this, that no, a hyperstructure can't be free forever and valuable to own. And I've been sort of wishing it into existence, and we've been debating a lot on Twitter. And that's why I invited him to be on the podcast to just, let's have a high resolution conversation, get into a place where we can actually have nuance. And I actually think that this episode, we created a lot of synthesis about when and where a hyperstructure can be free forever and valuable to own. And I think that this is, at least for me, an unlock in thinking about how we can fund public goods and create a plurality of hyperstructures that fund public goods in the Web3 ecosystem. So if you're into all of these nerdy subjects, funding public goods, using hyperstructures to do it, then I think you're going to enjoy this episode. Connor is such a good faith debater in this episode. This is my first time stepping out of the host chair and playing both host and debater. And Connor just handles it with such grace and articulateness that I think that we reached a synthesis in the end that is valuable for me. And I think that if it was valuable for me, then hopefully it's valuable for you, listener. Coordination, without further ado, I give you Connor McCormick, and we are discussing whether hyperstructures can be free forever and valuable to own. Enjoy.
ATHENA DAO is addressing the underfunded areas of women's health, such as menopause and endometriosis. ATHENA is a community-driven DAO, giving women a say in decision-making and funding the scientific breakthroughs that impact their lives. With cutting-edge technology like Molecule's IP NFT framework, they invest in research IP that ensures exclusive licensing rights. ATHENA DAO is raising awareness to women's health research, working alongside existing organizations. So, join ATHENA DAO today to help change the landscape of women's health research.
Hey, Connor, what's up?
Hey, how's it going?
Pretty good. Really excited to have this conversation about whether or not hyperstructures can be valuable to own and free forever, which is, you and I have traded Twitter exchanges on this for, I think, the last 6 or 9 months. And so really excited to have a high fidelity conversation about it.
It's about time. Yeah, Twitter is too low bandwidth. So here we are.
So maybe we'll start with defining hyperstructures. Hyperstructures are an idea from Jacob from Zora. And basically the idea is that a hyperstructure is a crypto protocol that is imbued in the blockchain. And Jacob defines a hyperstructure as a crypto protocol that can run free and forever without maintenance, interruption, or intermediaries. How does that definition sound to you?
It's good. It's good as a starting point. And I think where we'll get eventually is we'll point out, maybe some ways in which the definition that he gives at the top is insufficient to capture everything that we want to talk about. Maybe something that's worth mentioning about hyperstructures is why they're important, because one of the big problems that we face in the world right now is that, companies are building these incredibly valuable walled gardens, which then aren't owned by their users. and aren't controlled by their users in any way. And so what this means is that when somebody does come along and create, the Linux, for example, they have to do this as a passion project. They can't do it because it's going to be incredibly valuable. And that's because, when you create that walled garden, well, then you have IP and you own the user set and you can do kind of whatever you want with it, including running ads that your users don't like. And so if it's true that a hyperstructure can be built, then this is really exciting because it means that there's a totally new game that can be played, a totally new business model that can be built where we can have kind of our cake and eat it too. We can have this incredibly valuable for society thing, beneficial thing, alongside a something that's valuable in that it rewards the entrepreneurs and the people who did the work to build it. So I think it's kind of a high stakes conversation because if we can find a way to make this work, then there's a new business model on the line, which is able to reward the people who built it and beneficial for the people who use it. And then if not, then we're just fooling ourselves, right? And that has its own consequences.
Yeah, so I think what's at stake is what's the funding model for 21st century digital infrastructure, and can we take all of the innovation that happens in the open market and point it at the building out of public infrastructure in the metaverse in the it's 2023 saying we're going to build infrastructure and the metaverse is not hot anymore. It's the year of AI. But, assuming that this digital infrastructure does over time become very important to society and the free exchange of ideas and assets, then this could be important public infrastructure for the world. And that's, to me, what's at stake when we talk about hyperstructures. And so how does that resonate with you?
Totally. The thing that I am most interested in by far is how do we make it profitable for companies to do good, especially for the things that today are not profitable. And in particular, how do we make it only profitable for them to do things that are good? So non-exploitative behaviors become expensive, but the beneficial ones become sustainable.
So I want to rattle off a couple attributes of hyperstructures from Jacob's post, and then we can get into the meat of the discussion from there. And maybe we'll talk about an example of a hyperstructure while we're at it. So one of the examples that Jacob uses in the blog post is Uniswap as a hyperstructure. And Uniswap is, for the listeners probably know this already, but it's an AMM, an automated market maker that allows you to exchange asset X for asset Y. And Jacob's criteria for a hyperstructure are 1, that it's unstoppable, 2, that it's free, 3, that it's valuable, 4, that it's expansive, 5, that it's permissionless, 6, that it's positive sum, and 7, that it's credibly neutral. So I think when I think about Uniswap versus this definition, it's definitely not free in the users pay nothing sense. You are paying Ethereum gas fees, but you're not paying anything to the protocol. You're paying for the LP fees and the Ethereum protocol fees, but not anything back to the protocol itself. And maybe it's not completely permissionless because you have to have a certain asset in order to use it. But the fact that it's universally accessible and censorship resistant, to me, it still feels like it checks all of these boxes to me. And I'm wondering if you have any reaction to Uniswap as an example of a hyperstructure or any of those 7 criteria that Jacob lays out for hyperstructures.
So the ones that really matter to me is rent-free and valuable. Those are kind of the most important components in my mind. And everything else is nice to have, and I think beneficial. But really, my contention is around whether it can be rent-free and valuable. And I'm using rent-free here because I think that it helps to clarify, between the LP fees and that, there's a cost of operating the thing, and everybody's fine paying that. You understand that you need to put gas in your car. But really, we're talking about, an example of rent as well is if somebody owns, a piece of land, then they can charge people to live there. And if they own sufficient land, then they can hike up the prices really high. We see, of course, Google charges enormous rent on their dominance, their monopoly of search, until maybe now that LLMs are going to change that. So that's the example of rent. And we want to design structures that aren't able to charge these extractive rents and yet are still valuable for the people who help to create them.
Just a clarification on the Google example. So Google search is free, but the rent that is being charged is in the form of harvesting of our data and selling it to advertisers and bidding up the prices of ads. Did I get that right?
Perfect.
Okay. And I'm wondering, since Uniswap, the Ethereum protocol charges gas fees when you do a swap on Uniswap, and LPs, liquidity providers in Uniswap, can charge a fee on their LP. The fact that you can deploy Uniswap to any L2, or you can just choose not to use a specific LP, means that even though rent is sort of being charged, there is a fee, then it's not this sort of like overly dominant monopolistic rent. Whereas if you had a protocol-wide fee, then that's really what's at stake to you and matters with the term free, like free forever at the protocol level.
Yeah, and if you have something that is truly forkable, so this is where we get into like there's actually a hidden assumption as you get later into the article, which is that it's possible for anyone to come along and fork Uniswap in case the fees get too high, right? So this is the hidden assumption that's there, and this relates to the fact that Uniswap has this token, and this token is people hold this token for some reason, and whatever price they bid it up to, they must be bidding it up to because they think that in some way either other people are going to come along afterwards and also bid it up, so there's going to continue to be a market that either it must grow, right? Because otherwise their capital could be deployed more efficiently elsewhere. And why would somebody do that? Maybe because they think that somehow the market size is going to grow. So that's one reason. And then the other reason is due to some sort of profits that are going to be returned to the people who own those tokens, right? Protocol fee. And this is where you and I kind of like get into the meat of things, because I think that if Uniswap was truly forkable, all the way down to forking the liquidity providers, then that token wouldn't have, I'll say as much value, but I think it would really wipe out a lot of the value of the token, because of course we know that the code is forkable, but what is not forkable are all of the liquidity providers on it. So I think that it does have kind of this, a walled garden sort of feel to it, because it has captured those network effects. And I think that what you're doing if you're buying the Uni token is you're buying it because you expect that one day you will actually be able to charge a protocol fee, because there will be so much lock-in, and that will be a profitable thing to do. And it's just for now that people are not doing it. And so the heart of, maybe I can let you react to that, and then we can talk about, this idea of the threat of the fee, and how Jacob had said that he thinks that this is what gives, this is that tension that in principle is going to give rise to value in the Uni token.
Let me just try to reflect back to what I said, or what you said, which is, there's the users and the general public, and then there's the holders of the Uni token. And there's this incentive pressure between them, where the users of the protocol want it to stay free forever because that's their rational best interest. And then the Uni holders want to be able to have more value in their Uni, or create a dividend on their Uni. And so they want to turn on the fee switch. And these are two opposing zero-sum forces with each other. And so at risk here is the people who are in control of the protocol have the ability to turn on the fee switch through Uni governance. But there's a threat of a fork coming from the users on the other side. And the game theory is slightly different if you could fork out the liquidity providers and do a vampire attack, versus if you could only fork the protocol and not take the network effects and the liquidity provider. Arguably, it's the liquidity and the brands that are like the two things that aren't forkable that are extremely valuable there. And so at question here is, can Web3 protocols be free forever and incredibly valuable to own? So can Uni still have a market value on secondary markets without turning on the fee switch? And I think that right now we're in this place where Uni, because of the threat of the fee, can have a rational market value. But the question, I think for me, the question is, it's free for right now. I think it's inarguable that Uni is valuable right now and it's free right now, but can it be free forever? Does this stasis between the two opposing forces last forever? is I think where there's daylight between us. And I'm curious how you react to that.
Yeah, is it stable? Because of course, if it were the case that any token had some value in time, you could make the argument at that time that that was an instance of a hyperstructure. The question is just, does the hyperstructure, maintain? Is it a forever thing? And so just because a token has some value at some point in time doesn't mean that that's a good example of it being able to maintain that. You want to look at the underlying, game theory or the structure to see whether it has properties that you think like, oh yeah, actually probably this is going to make it. And that's what I'm saying isn't here. I think that there could be many explanations. Some of it, of course, like a market has many different kinds of players in it. And so it has like very sophisticated people who are maybe actually looking at the network dynamics and the positioning of Uni and the value of the brand and the probability of a fork being successful, and estimating the total amount of profit that they could gain before a fork would be successful and the cost of switching and all of this stuff, right? There's probably people doing that on one end. And there's probably other people who are just like, well, it seems to be popular to buy this, and so I'm going to buy it too. And that's fine, right? That's how markets work. But if it just turns out that this is, and so this is why I would say that I actually think that many elements of Uni make it not a good example of a hyperstructure, because as you pointed out, it's really difficult to fork the network effects, and it's really difficult to fork the brand. And so one way what we could maybe try and resolve this, like a thought experiment that helps us get a moment closer, is to imagine if there's an alternative to Uni. I don't know, what do we want to call it? Poly. And the Poly swap protocol allows, it's the brand, but what it is incapable of charging a fee. But there are many like sub swaps under it that can charge fees, and it always chooses the cheapest one, right? And so now we've put ourselves in a situation where we have made the brand irrelevant, because everybody, the brand can accrue value, but it's impossible for it to charge a fee. And so there wouldn't be a token, for example, associated with PolySwap. And then there's all these sub AMMs that have that are competing to be selected, and they're the ones that have tokens associated with them. But what this means, of course, is that we have now made everything forkable. So the brand is irrelevant, essentially. It's forkable to any of these AMMs, and the network liquidity is forkable to any of these AMMs. And now the question is, if there were two competing AMMs under that, number one and number two, then and they both had tokens associated with them, how valuable should those tokens be? And my claim is that they should be essentially valueless.
Yeah, so I mean, this might be too reductionist, but it feels like in the Poly example, say that you could fork out the liquidity and could fork out the brand, then there seems to be like that hyperstructure would be much less valuable to own, because the threat of the infinite forkability of it means that there's much less leverage on behalf of the people who want it to be, that want to give it a fee. That might be too reductionist, but that's kind of what I heard.
No, I think that's right. That's what I agree. Yeah.
I think it's really like kind of fun to pinch and zoom on where we agree and where we disagree. And again, like I'm in the camp that a hyperstructure can be free forever and also valuable to own. And I think you're in the camp that it could be free, but not forever, and valuable to own. And I think that, the variables we can play with here are how forkable is the brand and the liquidity. And then the other variable I think we can play with is how forever is forever. Are we talking about the heat death of the universe? Are we talking about 10 years from now? Are we talking about 2 years from now? Are we talking about 2 days from now? So there's like a gradient there. And then the other gradient I feel is who are the market participants? Are we talking about family offices? Are we talking about central banks? Are we talking about retail investors? Are we talking about institutional investors? Because those people might have different valuation models. And now I'm starting to see a gradient of where there's daylight between us and how to sort of pinch and zoom and resolve that gradient. Is that fair? I'm trying to, this is my first time being a host and also like debating at the same time. So I'm trying to play both hats. Yeah.
I'll do my best to find the point with you too. So
yeah,
I think maybe the way that you could, it sounds like then, and this is where I'm a little confused, is that like, it sounds like you agree that the more forkable you make something, in other words, the less leverage it has, the less valuable it will be.
I think it depends on who's valuing it. Well, let me unfurl a little bit of my thinking, and maybe that'll illuminate the differences between us. And I'm sorry for not just giving you a yes or no. I have a thought that the existing pricing model for companies is based off of P to E ratios on top of their revenue. So Apple has a value, a market cap, and it trades at a relative value to its forward revenue. So this is what's called price to earnings, the price of the stock relative to the earnings of the company that it's based on. And I think that, there are some hyperstructures that will be valued in that way, the ones that are revenue generating. But I think that there is a possibility of novel pricing models in the Web3 space in the information economy. So basically, the P to E ratio was conceived of and works really well in industrial age capitalism. I think it's stable, and I think that that's a good thing. But I think that in an information economy where attention is the most valuable commodity, it's possible to create new valuation models off of things that command attention. This is interesting and novel, but it's also dangerous, right? Because this is how pump and dump schemes work. This is how Pepe works, is that people just create meme stocks, Dogecoin and Pepe, that don't have a stable attractor to them. And that's how you get like the pump, and then you get the dump, in which all this attention flows in, the stock rises, and then the early adopters dump it on the late adopters, and then the whole thing collapses. But I think that it would be, and so I'm not advocating for that, nor do I think that it's valuable to even entertain that as a valuation model for hyperstructures, which I think we're talking about internet age infrastructure. What I do think is interesting is that you could have a protocol that's built off of something other than revenue, like, I don't know, say fundamental value creation for the world, or just a strong brand that has staying power, and that could command lasting attention over time. The attention is the selling point. And I think that there could be, instead of price to earnings, there could be like price to attention or price to legitimacy. And so I think that it's there. And I'm acknowledging that this is sort of a little bit of an out there theory, but I do think that, from first principles, we are in an attention economy. We've seen things valued off of attention. And so it's not that much of a stretch to say, oh, you could create a stable attractor here, I think. And so in this Uniswap example or the Poly example, if you had a brand that was so strong and you were creating such a pro-social impact DAO for the world, then would it be possible without ever making any revenue for something to be valuable forever if it commanded lasting attention? And the gradient is here is like, maybe it has, maybe like, and this gets into like the whole meme stock thing with GameStop, where it's like the retail investors don't even really care about its revenue. It's just like, we like the stock. That's a meme from the whole GameStop thing. And like, maybe central banks and like family offices wouldn't buy because of the attention, but maybe there will be a certain subset that have such a brand affinity that they'll buy the token anyway. And so anyway, sorry, I know this is a long diversion from what you asked me.
No, this is great. I have a bit of a response to it, because I'm recognizing that we've there's a little fork we've made. I want to come back to the point that we are on the graph, but I think that there's something really interesting here. This notion of a recognition of the fact that if all of us find some way to agree that there's something that we consider valuable, then that's what makes it valuable. And so I think that that's absolutely true.
It's like a coordination game. Yeah.
Yeah. It's not far out there. I mean, it's how it works, right? And we know that we can, like, if you want examples of this, we can look at fashion and we can look at design. These are things that accrue value because we have all agreed that they're valuable. They're just showing points. The problem is, well, there's two things to say about this. One, we don't need a hyperstructure for this. You don't need the threat of the fee for this. You can just have a token, like you said, Dogecoin or Pepe, that everybody agrees is valuable, and people can buy into it, and then it can have value for everybody who has bought into it. And this is where you get the hodl meme, right? This is where you get everybody trying to tell everybody else not to. And I think that much of the crypto culture that has come out of these coins comes from a recognition of this game theory, right? This is why you wake up every morning and you put GM into your Discord channel, is because you want to remind everybody that you're all in this game together, right? And if you defect on that, then everybody's going to be like, well, what the heck? Why did they defect? And so I think that all of that's fine, but the problem is that you need to recognize that those games are they are tragedies of the commons waiting to happen, right? is the value of that thing is itself a public good. And everybody has a reason to defect right now if they think it's in any way unstable. And so you actually have to find the right, like a game theoretic landscape to put that thing in, so that when the energy flows downhill, it all collects at, an appropriate value for that thing. That's non-speculative, right? That's somehow like game theoretic or structural. And I don't think that hyperstructures offer that. So I don't think the threat of the fee is that example of that thing, but I do think that there are examples of that thing. Does that map onto at all how you're thinking?
Yeah, I think somewhat. I think that like things like Dogecoin and Pepe are poor examples of this, and I don't even like using them because to me they resemble things that aren't stable attractors for value. But something more like Rocket Pool, which doesn't have a fee at all, but creates value for someone who's staking, I think is a really interesting mechanic. So like Rocket Pool basically solves the problem that I need 32 ETH in order to stake on the Ethereum network, and with a certain amount of RPL, I can stake with only 8 ETH, and the RPL just serves as collateral. And so because of that, it gives you a superpower. You can stake on behalf of others, and can stake with less money, and you have to purchase RPL and stake it in order to use that. But there's not a fee in there, and so there's a community of people who are revolving around Rocket Pool and using the tech stack, and they're not generating revenue for the Rocket Pool organization in any way, but they've created a stable attractor in which people want the tokens. There's locked up supply, and there's demand for the token because people want to use the tech. And I'll be curious to see, like, will people fork Rocket Pool, or do they just have such an affinity for it, for the brand that and what it's doing for the decentralization of Ethereum that they won't do that. And so I would just enter, I guess TLDR Rocket Pool has entered the chat as an example.
Rocket Pool is here. I think that's fine. The question for us is, does Rocket Pool have a token that another way to get your token to be valuable is, of course, to give it some sort of utility. And that's fine, right? So people are getting their returns, but they're getting their returns from staking, essentially, right? So the returns are coming from outside of the system. And that's where you get, and so that can't be an example of a public good, right? Because instead those returns are coming from Ethereum.
Right, and so there's a rivalrousness to staking on the Ethereum network. And so you're saying it's not a public good because, well, from that angle, it's not a public good.
Some proportion of these tokens are now owned by the creators of Rocket Pool, right? They've given themselves a cut. Then I guess, yeah, they'll have value because they're in demand. Yeah, I think that's fine.
So it still feels like, to me, the nuance is like, can something be free forever? And there's a couple examples at play here. Free forever and valuable to own. The examples at play here are Uniswap and Polyswap, which is an example of Uniswap where you can fork out the liquidity in the brand. And then something like Rocket Pool, which creates demand through something other than profits and dividends for the holders.
We can just think about, it's basically a fancy way to charge a fee. And maybe it's useful in some way, but, what you've done is you're asking people to lock up their capital, and they're giving up the counterfactual earnings that they could have if they were to put it elsewhere. And they're allowing you then to cash out on your tokens. And so it's just a fancy way to charge a fee. And one of the problems with public goods is that you can't charge a fee very, very easily, right? It's non-excludable. So Rocket Pool is excludable.
I'm a big fan of public goods. It's one of my favorite memes. I'm actually looking at the HyperStructures post, and I'm curious, how important is it that the hyperstructure is a public good? He does use the word public goods a couple times in the post. And one of the nuances that I'll just introduce here while we're talking about public goods is that many of these things are double-sided markets upon which one side is a public good and the other is a rivalrous good. And the example that I'll give here is that Ethereum, being able to read the blockchain is a public good. It's non-excludable and it's non-rivalrous. But to write to the chain, there's only a certain amount of block space. And because of that scarcity and that congestion, writing to the chain is not a public good. Similarly, the fact Uniswap exports on-chain pricing to every asset in the ecosystem that is Uniswappable, and And so in that sense, it is a public good. But when you look at it from the perspective of an LP who has to put tokens in order to access that part of the hyperstructure, or someone who is using it to trade, it is not a public good because so basically, I think there's a nuance here where each of these things are an end-sided market, and one part of them is a public good, and the other ones are more rivalrous. And so it just depends on the angle that you look at them.
Yeah, I guess I'm interested in finding business models for pure public goods. So an example is an open space park, right? Or free software. Someone had to develop Linux, and it took them a lot of time and energy and effort. And I would like there to be like at least 3 competitors to Linux out there. But it's not in any way profitable for someone to make free and open software. And so instead we have, I guess Unix-based Mac OS, and we have Windows, and I guess that's kind of about it. So this is what I'm interested in finding business models for. Yes, of course, there are creative ways that you can arrange businesses so that they solve certain public goods problems while still having a business model. And this is like the domain of social entrepreneurship and stuff like that. And maybe that's the best we can do. If that's the best we can do, I'm really bummed. But like, sure, I can imagine that you could start a business that sells hotcakes and uses the revenue from the hotcakes to improve the forest trails. And when people come in, they purchase the hotcakes, and maybe that's sufficient. But it seems to me that and actually, if you think about it, that's a little bit what coffee shops are. Is they're providing this public good, which is you get to go and hang out in this great space where you can work and focus and meet people. And then, they're doing that by way of kind of this like social norm that we've created, which you really should buy something if you're going to go and use their Wi-Fi. And you should probably buy something like once every hour. And that seems to work, right? That seems to be a stable way to fund that particular public good, because they're not charging you per minute like a co-working space would. But I want to know, is there a way to design something that can fund a public good? And that's what brought me to HyperStructures, was the thought that maybe that was going to work.
Well, let me just there's a really great tweet from Vitalik that I just pulled up that I want to read off to you, and I want to get your response to it. So this is a tweet from March 25th, 2020 from Vitalik. And it goes like this: remember the primary dictum of good economic design: tax the congestible, aka the scarce resources, and subsidize the public goods. So things like transaction inclusion into the Ethereum blockchain are the congestible asset that allows you to have the public good of network security. And so maybe in the park example, there's a park near my parents' house that does this. Is that the park itself is a public good, but they make you pay for parking if you're going to drive there, because that's the congestible asset, is the resources. And so to me, I think it's useful to have a high resolution view of what's a public good and what's not. The park itself will be free forever. Well, hopefully free for the foreseeable future, because nothing is forever. But the congestible asset, which is what supports the park, is not free forever. And so again, this is like a multi-sided marketplace, and one part is free and one part is congestible. And I think this is rooted in sound economic theory. Like Ostrom's 8 principles for design for managing the commons is, one of them is clearly defined boundaries. And I think that a boundary between the congestible asset and the public good asset is maybe like the key delineation point there. So what's your response to that?
This is great. And we should do as much of, this creative sort of like social entrepreneurship and hyperstructure funding for public goods as possible. But sometimes the congestible isn't enough, or the demand for the congestible isn't enough to fund the public good, or to fund it at a sufficient level. And so if you have a sufficiently small park with lots of visitorship, then yeah, maybe it's enough to cover all the requirements of maintaining the park. But if you have this sprawling park that has, hundreds of miles of trails, like think about the Appalachian Trail, then maybe it's just not enough. And then the question is, well, who should pay? This is always the question. Well, which congestible are we going to tax? A great example of this is carbon credits, right? Or carbon sequestration. It has proven challenging to find ways to find a congestible that can be sufficiently taxed in order to cover the amount of funding that should be available for CO2 sequestration or avoidance of CO2 emissions. There are times when the congestible asset, there's no guarantee from the universe that says, don't worry, the congestible asset will always be valuable enough that it will be able to cover the value of the public good, right? The funding that's needed for the public good. And so perhaps a canonical example of this is CO2 credits, right? So carbon credits are something that we have a lot of trouble figuring out how to fund. And basically the best congestible asset we figured out is that there are brands that don't want their brand tarnished, right? So we're like, in some sense, we're taxing brand value. And so what we do is we try and apply social pressure. We say that if you aren't going to, buy these CO2 credits, then, you're kind of a bad brand and we're not going to buy from you. And so then they do. And then if they, do it poorly, then we accuse them of greenwashing. And that's how we get them to have integrity. And so, but that's really it's kind of, first of all, it's kind of weird to put all of that on, public brands, because there's many other companies that contribute to the problem other than just these brands. And then, it's a really unstable form of funding that just doesn't quite cover the entire need that we have. And so that's an example of a public good that is really difficult to find a stable funding source for.
I'm wondering where you sort of see the biggest differences between, I don't know, it feels like we're agreeing a lot when we dive into the nuance. But just at the highest level, this idea that a crypto protocol can be free forever and valuable to own, that at the highest level, there's distance between us. But when we drive into the nuance, it feels like we're building a lot of consensus here. And it feels like the knobs to tweak are the value of the brand, the forkability of the liquidity, the model of why things are valuable in the first place, the fact that these are double-sided markets where one side of it can be congestible and the other side can be a public good. And I'm wondering if we've gotten to a synthesis where maybe there's a shade of gray on free forever, would it be true to say that we agree that if something is a pure public good and there's no congestible asset and the brand and it's forkable, and then it can't really be valuable to own. But if it's got defensibility against fork in the form of liquidity or brand halo, and there is a congestible asset that can be monetized and it can command lasting attention, then it can be free for a long time and valuable to own. I'm trying to go back up to the main disagreement, which is free forever and valuable to own, and build a high resolution map of the synthesis that we've just built here. And so where do you think that we're far apart from each other, and how would you respond to those two polarities that I just articulated or tried to articulate?
So what I would say is that I think where we disagree is that I say that as forkability goes up, value goes down. And that
I agree with that.
This is synonymous with saying as forkability goes up, the time horizon goes down, right? So if you have and I think it makes sense that those go together, because of course, if you make a lot of money over a short period of time, that can end up being equivalent to making a small amount of money over a long period of time. And so then the question is just, if you agree with that, then hyperstructures become more akin to somebody buying a token because they think that everybody else is also going to buy that token, right? So it becomes much closer to speculation. And this isn't to say that speculation can't create stable value, right? We could, you, me, and a bunch of our friends could create a private market for a token, and we could all buy into that thing, and we could just never sell, right? And that could be stable because we're all friends, we trust each other. But the point is just that speculative tokens have intrinsic dynamics that tend towards, people defecting and selling their tokens, once they go up sufficiently. And so then this stability itself becomes subject to these game theoretic properties that we already worry about, right? Tragedies of the commons, where every single individual defects, and what's even worse is they are tragedies of the commons with this extremely nonlinear collapse. Because as soon as one person defects, that's information for someone else to also defect. So the summary then is just that if you accept that as forkability goes up and then value of the token should go down, then at some point we just get back to the same point of saying that hyperstructures are isomorphic with. They're the same as a token that you're speculating on, and you hope that it's going to retain its speculative value.
I mean, one area where I maybe think we might diverge, and I'll be curious if you let me go. Let's go into it. Is so there's this idea of attractors, which is basically an incentive field that warps behaviors, and like physical attractors are like a mini golf hill where it's like it's easy to putt into a hole that is downhill from you because gravity will just carry the ball to that place, and then it's the inverse is true, or is true where it's hard to putt uphill because gravity is working against you. And so there's psychological attractors also where like for example, it's known that this is a Colorado example, but at night, if we're camping, then we'll just gather around the fire. The fire is the Schelling point. That is the psychological attractor. And so I think thinking about the attractor dynamics of these tokens and how stable those attractors are is extremely important. And something like Pepe, which to me feels like a not very stable attractor because it's just mimetic value because when memes grow too big, then they're not cool anymore. They're not a stable attractor anymore. It's like the same criteria where like Facebook was super cool when we were in college, but as soon as our parents were on it, then it wasn't cool anymore. So you have either attractors that are stable and you have attractors that aren't stable. And I think that for me, the difference between like a pump and dump attractor that is not stable and an attractor that is based off of the value of the token is based off of attention, but there's some sort of stable and growing dynamic to the attractor to it. Those are two completely separate scenarios for a hyperstructure being free forever and valuable to own. And I think that the nuance here is that, like the example that you gave, is that if you and the three friends buy a token and you agree not to sell because you're high trust, then there's no defection. It's a very different scenario if you decide that you want that token economy to grow. If there's not a stable attractor underneath of that, then the incentive to defect becomes larger. Whereas if you're starting a token that has a TAM of $2 trillion and eventual TAM, network effect TAM, of $2 trillion, and it's just 5 of you that have it at the start, and there's a credible path to getting to realize that $2 billion of 2 trillion, 2 billion of TAM, then there isn't as much of an incentive for people to defect on each other. And so I guess what I'd say in response to that, I agree with the nuance, the one-dimensional nuance that more forkability equals a shorter time period. I'm wondering if you would accept the take that a more stable attractor and like maybe the attractor is like value creation for the world, will increase the time horizon for which something can be free forever and valuable to own. Does that land?
Yeah, 100%. Yep.
Okay.
But I think it takes us out of the domain of talking about hyperstructures, and we are just in the realm of, like, you don't need hyperstructures for this, right? My criticism of hyperstructures comes down to the fact that I don't think it has the game theoretic properties that we're promising, right? And so if it turns out that you can move, you can put attractor basins wherever you want. We're the humans that control the Schelling points as much as the Schelling points control us.
Yeah, there's something profound there, but I'll just interject that I do think hyperstructures matter here because hyperstructures are unstoppable and they're on a global, credibly neutral ledger. And we haven't had the ability to have digital hardness, digital certainty before blockchains and hyperstructures, and that creates a foundation for more stable attractors. And so I think that we may disagree a little bit there.
If what you're saying is that they will have more durable speculation, then I agree. But I think it's still speculation.
Well, I think they have more durable attractors. So imagine if Uniswap was a company. It's a building in, let's call it fucking New York, because that's the financial capital of the Americas. So you have to basically assume that New York is going to stay there, and like the sea levels aren't going to rise, and that people will continue to go into work every day, and it'll continue to be valuable, and that all those people you trust those people to keep showing up to work. But hyperstructures to me are unstoppable because they're on the blockchain, and the blockchain is anti-fragile, and you don't have intermediaries that you need to rely on to keep showing up to work and keeping the computer systems online. They don't have maintenance or interruption or intermediaries. And to me, that creates a more stable basin of an attractor. And yeah, I mean, you could speculate on top of anything, but to me, it's about creating a more stable attractor. And yes, there can be speculation on top of that, as there can be speculation on top of anything. We could gamble on what the weather will be tomorrow. But I think that stable attractor makes like a really big difference in when you're talking about something that's supposed to last for generations.
I would agree the risk is lower, right? And it's an incredible technical achievement. But, you know, like if it's not providing value, if whatever that smart contract that you emitted is not providing some value and is not extracting some of that value, then you're not actually buying it because you are hoping to get a return. You're buying it for some speculative purpose. And so it can be anything, right? As our friend and founder of FTX would say, it can be a box. Just imagine there's a box and someone puts some money in the box, and that causes the value of the box to go up. And then everybody else says, oh, wow, the value of the box has gone up. Maybe I should put the money in the box. And so this is like, you know, this is the thing that I am really anti. So if you want to like simplify the whole conversation, I think is that I'm totally friendly to the idea that you can have attractors and attractor basins. I think, though, that the attractor basin needs to be kind of like game theoretically real, right? And many things go into proving something about whether, you know, which direction is downhill in a game, and it's non-trivial to find.
These things are reflexive and network-based, right? And so the fact that one agent thinks that it's a shitcoin and or conversely they think it's the next Bitcoin can alter the incentive dynamic. And so you know, how do you create an attractor basin that is anti-fragile against that is more complicated in a network-based reflexive world.
Yes. And yes. I couldn't agree more. I mean, I had this, so I'm kind of souring on I'm not as excited about prediction markets as I was before, and markets in general as tools for collective sense making, because of this whole reflexive aspect. And I had a conversation with Robin Hanson. Are you familiar with Robin Hanson? He's like the person who came up with the idea, or really popularized the idea of prediction markets. Essentially, what a prediction market is it is a tool for making decisions collectively. You know, not only inference, but then, you know, he imagines them as tools for actually deciding things. So a example is you and I could set up a betting market that says, is it going to rain tomorrow? And what Robin imagines is that there could be a world where, you know, in Cryptopia, where we bet on who's going to be the best mayor of the town. And maybe we bet based on a very simple criteria. We say, who's going to reduce crime the most, right? And so there could be one mayor that is thought to, you know, she's going to be the one that is going to reduce crime the most. And there's another one that's thought to be, you know, he's going to be a really bad mayor. But the problem that this introduced is it gives an incentive to the bad mayor to potentially like take out a massive loan or get money from his supporters that then can influence the market, right? So that he's more likely to become mayor. In fact, it can be more nefarious than that. The mayor could potentially hire some people to go and like break a bunch of windows, and, you know, on the rocks say, on the rocks that they threw through the windows, they say, you know, if the mayor becomes president, if my competitor becomes president or becomes mayor, then we're going to commit more crimes. So that there's actually like all these adverse incentives that can exist in that environment. He doesn't think that this is correct. He thinks that it's not true, that markets can influence themselves. But I think we've seen in crypto that, of course, it's the case that markets can influence themselves. It's part of what creates the booms and busts. So this is what worries me about prediction markets in general, as a tool for, you know, collective decision making. And one of the decisions that we can make is decisions around value. And so I think that it will be as stable as prediction markets are, right? There can be manipulation.
Yeah, this is, you know, in the GreenPilled book, one of the things that we modeled, that we put a graphic for, and this is an idea from block science, is that crypto economic systems are a subset of economic systems, which are a subset of social systems, which are a subset of complex systems. And when you put humans into something, they're very irrational. It is hard to model their behavior. And so, I mean, I guess it might be reductionist, but I would say if you're trying to create a stable attractor, creating it around human incentives and human behavior is not a solid foundation unless you can create a really solid rational Schelling point around one thing. It has to be very intrinsic, would be a way I would translate that back to our discussion about hyperstructures and their value.
Maybe there's something to say here on our way out, which is that I have found a mechanism set that I'm really excited about, which I think is a stable attractor for valuation of public goods, and it kind of inverts the theory, which is it says that if you don't value this public good as much as I do, then it's going to be expensive for you and I to transact. And so this actually gives the people that you buy from an incentive to increase their valuation of these public goods. And so there's lots to say about this. There's a podcast that I did with a friend, and I think he'll have it up by the time we have this out, which is, I think his podcast is called Connected Dots. It's Stephen Hurtado. So, maybe there's an interesting thing to explore there around alternative mechanisms that I think do have this desirable property of having the ability to fund public goods without speculative dynamics. Or with, another way to say this is maybe it's still speculative, but it seems to be stable long-term.
If we're funding public goods with it, then I think that's really great. And just send me a link to it and I'll make sure that it makes it in the show notes of this show. We started this episode diverging on, can hyperstructures be valuable to own and also free forever? And I want to pinch and zoom on the word forever because there's a giant gray area there. I think that we decided that the more of a stable attractor you can create around the hyperstructure, the longer they can be free. And the less forkability the hyperstructure is, the longer it can be free. And I think that that's what we've really pinched in. It's a reductionist take, but that's kind of the synthesis of where we got in this episode. And before we were recording, you were saying like, I want to be able to put this to bed so that I can like free up my memory and be able to sleep free at night and not worry about this anymore. Have we gotten A, do you agree with my summary of the episode? And B, are you going to be able to sleep at night because you feel like you've gotten it out of your system, this whole free forever and valuable to own debate that we've been having on Twitter for 6 to 9 months?
Let me just say that I think that there might actually be a way to save the mechanism. And I've spent a little bit of time playing with the game theory and seeing if I can make it make sense. And I haven't yet, but maybe it could be made to make sense. And so I think in that sense, I'm still curious because, and maybe a listener would have a lot of fun going and looking at the game theory and seeing if they can find a way to make it have this property. I think, you talked about these attractor basins. I think that how I would summarize what we talked about is that it seems like you and I both agree that you can place these attractor basins kind of wherever you want. And it sounds also like we agree that speculation is like the top of the mountain and not the attractor basin. So it's the attractor peak, which means, of course, that easily things are going to flow down elsewhere. And so you're looking for social solutions to the problem. Put an attractor basin there, which kind of modifies the landscape in order so that so it's no longer a mountain, it's now a valley. And I'm interested in game theoretic solutions to this. And I think they both complement one another. So I don't think that this makes me feel better because I think nothing that you've said has made me be like, no, I don't think he has. I think he has a fundamental misunderstanding. I think we're just interested in optimizing different places. And I will say that if you're interested in optimizing the social Schelling point, that this requires you to tell a story that Schelling point is stable. Because if everybody believes that Schelling point is stable, then it will be stable. But that only works until the moment when it becomes clear that it's no longer stable. So if you can manage to engineer into the bottom of the mechanism, a mechanism design that's itself stable or that's self-regulating, then I think it'll be even easier to engineer that social Schelling point above it.
I don't think that you can put an attractor basin anywhere. I think you have to put it somewhere in a game theoretic optimal place. And it's like the same reason why cities have evolved around rivers is because there's economic and resource advantages to having that Schelling point around a river. And so there's a difference between a con game where everyone says, hey, this is around a river and it's stable, even though it's not, this is the whole emperor has no clothes social phenomena. There's a difference between a Schelling point set around emperor has no clothes type of dynamics versus a Schelling point and an attractor that's genuinely around some sort of spigot of economic value. And maybe that's why we've seen Rocket Pool oriented around ETH staking, which is a source of economic value, Uniswap oriented around token swapping, which is like the most fundamental thing that blockchains do. And that's my equivalent of like 17th century cities evolving around riverbeds as stable attractors. How does that resonate?
It's beautiful. It unfortunately opens another question for me, and I'd love to hear your answer to, if that's possible, then it seems like kind of the analogy of a river is something like the claim that humans are valuable, or humans, human well-being is valuable, right? Let's say that there's this claim that you could make, which is that human well-being is valuable. Why is it not possible to just put that on a blockchain and it automatically becomes its own attractor basin? That's kind of like self stabilizing.
So to me, it feels pretty clear that if humans are valuable, and let's just sit with the awkwardness of that statement for a second there. Are we talking about their financial capital in the most commodified way? Or are we talking about their spiritual and intellectual capital and their joie de vivre, their zest of life?
The second, yeah. In human well-being, yeah. Right? Or eudaimonia or whatever. Find the meme that you really like, that you think everybody else can also really like.
I think that like in the most commodified financial sense, global capitalism views humans as valuable because it can extract money from them, and I think that's what the old model is in my mind. But if there was a way to create a stable attraction around creating value for people in more positive sum games, then I think that's what's at stake here when we're talking about, can hyperstructures be free forever and valuable to own? Like, can we create a stable attractor around providing value to people instead of extracting value for people? And I'm not sure what the answer is. I mean, ideally, that's what governments would be, is that they're creating so much public good that that they're creating a stable attractor for the public good of the nation. And I don't know, I feel like we're trying to converge and now we're just diverging again. But that would be my take, trying to take a swing at creating a stable attractor off of the value of people in like a not commodified sense. How does that resonate? It's
right. Yeah, I think it's right. Is you're just pointing out that it's not enough to have the there must be something that you do in addition to just the fact that people like it as an idea, right? There's a combination of like the action that you take alongside like what you say is going to happen. And so I think that's where you and I meet, is that you need the memes to create the Schelling point, and you need the mechanisms or the action to create the Schelling point
and stability. Okay, well, are you going to be able to sleep at night? Can you free up the memory space now that we've had this converging conversation?
I'll say yes, but I know that I'm now going to go back and I'm going to check to see if there's any way to fix it. I'll let you know if I make any progress.
We started off with, can hyperstructures be valuable to own and free forever? And then I think we identified pinch and zooming on the forever part, and we've identified where we were apart, and we've created synthesis around that. And so I think that whenever I record a GreenPilled episode, while I'm recording it, I'm like a deer in the headlights, just like trying to hang. But then I listen to it later and I absorb the points. And so what I proposed is that let's both listen to the episode. Let's figure out if there's anything we missed, and we can pinch and zoom again and do another episode if we didn't quite get there. But I think we got an order of magnitude closer to synthesis on this point. And I think we illuminated some pretty valuable stuff when it comes to hyperstructure design. At least it's something I'm going to take with me in my future projects. So yeah, thank you for the episode. And I also think I just want to call out, this is an example of, we disagreed on something on Twitter and it didn't turn into a flame war. Instead, we created synthesis and nuance, and that's a beautiful thing in itself. Yeah, same to you.
Well, and thanks to you for your behavior on that, because I think it was exemplary of what we can do.
Yeah, likewise. I enjoyed the conversation. I hope the listeners do too. And Connor, it was a pleasure. So thanks again.
You too. Thanks for putting up with the internet. I'll talk to you.
Thanks to the editors who have to splice together 4 different recordings of this.
I'm so sorry.
All right. Yeah, we'll buy you a beer or an NFT. Peace and love. Bye.
That's right. Bye.